Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy B Mahari here, represent Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. You understand what I'm saying? Tonight, we'll have our regular show, our basketball conversations, 9 p.m. Central Time, right here on this channel, though, too, guys. So if you guys are subscribed to the channel, make sure to tune in. And we're going to discuss about episodes 5 and 6 of the Last Dance documentary. We're going to get into a lot of different stuff, though, tonight. So stay tuned for that. But I wanted to particularly talk about, the Horace Grant subject here because there's been a story that it came out this the last few days that really has been making a lot of headlines. Okay, and it revolves around a story that Sam Smith, who used to work for the Chicago Tribune, did not entail in his famous book called The Jordan Rules in 1992, which was the fifth best-selling book in the U.S. Okay, and it revolves around a time where um, the Bulls were on the road. Okay, when the Bulls were on the road, okay, um, there was a big thing that uh, Horace Grant, whenever he had a bad game, and this is according to what Sam Smith, talked about. He said, um, when Horace Grant would have a bad game on the team plane or in the hotel or whatever, all right, Michael Jordan would intentionally not allow him to eat or not allow him to have any food with him. You understand what I'm saying? Now, here's the full quote. This is what the full quote that Smith wrote here, that unfortunately was not in the book, in the original Jordan Rules book. End quote. Players would come over to me over the years and say, "You know what he did? He took Horace Grant's food away on the plane because Horace had a bad game. Michael told the stewardess, 'Don't feed him. He doesn't deserve to eat.'" End quote. Now here's more. They would tell me stuff like that, and then they say, "Why don't you write this?" And I would say, "Well, I can't write it unless you say it. I don't do leak sources. You can't do that kind of stuff on these kind of things. If you want to be quoted, I've got no problem with that. No, 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 no. We can't say that about Michael Jordan." End quote. Now, it that right. I'm going to get into that big issue about Horace Grant in just a moment here. But I was watching Undisputed and revolving around that subject. Okay, because I don't watch Undisputed at all because it's not worth my time and energy to listen to two clowns who clearly have very biased opinions about it. But Shannon Sharp really made me laugh in this instant, and I'm not laughing in a comic kind of way, and it's just on the sense of yeah, that's true. Shannon Sharp, when he was talking about this particular subject here, he said that listen, if Michael did that to me, I would kick his ass. You know what I mean? You don't just do that, to teammates and stuff like that. And then Skip Bayless, who is the biggest Michael Jordan fanboy of all fanboys, was kind of just trying to excuse it, kind of like, well, he was just trying to, motivate Horace Grant. He was just trying to, get him tougher and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? I'm like, God damn, really, Skip Bayless? Really, Skip Bayless? Man, Skip Bayless is nothing more than a troll. But I just had to, shake my head when I heard what Skip Bayless had to say. Like, bro, stripping a man's food away. Listen, I don't care if he's the most hated criminal of all. You don't strip a man's food. I'm sorry, man. And people need to realize Shannon Sharp grew up in the deep South. All right. If you had a chance to watch his documentaries or learn about his story, okay, his family grew up very, very poor. Okay, they had to literally live in this, wooden house where it's basically no electricity, no technology, nothing, and literally had to eat live animals to survive. They had to use water from some well that was like about a walking distance away from their own home. And so Shannon Sharp and his brother Sterling Sharp, they grew up very, very rough. So I believe it. I definitely believe it because listen, Shannon Sharp, he may be, a comedian, and maybe sometimes he could just be very, very biased, but I believe what he said because listen, if John Elway or Terrell Davis decided to strip away Shannon Sharp's food, there was going to be some problems. I mean, you didn't want those kind of issues with Shannon Sharp back in the day, particularly when he was playing with the Broncos. Okay, don't let the comedian stuff fool you. Sharon Sharp is tough as they get. And also another thing, He can also bench 415 pounds at age 51. So Shannon Sharp is built like a tank. So I believe that very, very wholeheartedly. But let me get back to the subject in hand here, okay? You hear these stories, and you hear a lot of the stuff that was being written on the Jordan Rules book by Sam Smith, because we also have to remember that Sam Smith began his journalism career as an investigative reporter, and then was assigned to the Chicago Bulls beat. Okay, his job, his role was to try to investigate what goes on in those locker rooms and what goes on in the practices, and he had to cultivate relationships to try to get the stories. Okay. That's what you have to do when you're a journalist. You have to talk to people. You have to cultivate relationships. You got to get them to trust you to write down the stories. Okay. And he couldn't do leak sources. He couldn't do that. So he had to literally had people on the inside that the players can trust to let him write the story. And unfortunately, Horace Grant was the leak that told the story. Now, initially, I didn't believe it in the beginning, but as I began to continue to reread, some of the parts of the book and some of the stuff that in old articles from the Chicago Tribune, I began to believe that Horace Grant definitely snitched and definitely told a lot of the dirt that what goes on in the locker rooms. Now, let's keep this in mind here. Michael Jordan is no saint. He is no saint whatsoever. All right, because this is not the first time that Michael Jordan had fights, with teammates and practices. Just ask Will Perdue and Steve Kerr. But also, there's another fighting incident that probably took place in, I think, 91, 92 or something. I'm not sure. I tried to find what year this was, but, unfortunately, that's kind of been dried up, but it doesn't matter. Um, Michael Jordan you know, was basically berating Bill Cartwright. He didn't really like Bill Cartwright when he got traded from the New York Knicks for his best friend and bodyguard Charles Oakley. Because he loved Charles Oakley as a great friend and always protected him from the beatdowns that the Pistons would give him during the playoffs. Now, during games, Michael Jordan would do whatever he can to try to embarrass and try to show up Bill Cartwright, to try to send a message loud and clear to Jerry Krause that they never should have traded him in the first place. You know what I mean? He would intentionally, throw bad passes because there was perception around the league that Bill Cartwright had bad hands and couldn't catch good passes. Now, there was one particular instance where in the locker room, Michael Jordan was basically berated and tried to embarrass Bill Cartwright when Cartwright was not playing very good. All right. So in the locker room, Jordan resorted to try to embarrass him in front of the entire team. And afterwards, Bill Cartwright had to pull him to the side and said, "Listen," he said, "Look," end quote, "look, if you ever do that, if you ever do anything like that again, you will never play basketball again because I will break both your legs." All right. And Jordan took it seriously. Listen, Bill Cartwright had lethal elbows. He could really hurt people. Don't let that skinny frame fool you, okay? Isaiah Thomas got elbowed by Bill Cartwright, not once but twice. Okay, and don't forget, Akeem Olajuwon had a broken eye socket in, I think, 90, 91 or something like that, and had to wear eye goggles off of that because of an elbow he took from Bill Cartwright. So Bill Cartwright did what you're supposed to do against any bully: stand up for yourself and not take any BS. And another familiar story, kind of like that, was back in the 96-97 season when Robert Parish was on the team. This was his final season in the NBA. Now, let's keep this in mind. Robert Parish have already won championships with different teams, which includes the Boston Celtics. So he was not in awe of the Bulls dynasty because he played with great players like Larry Bird and Ken McHale and Dennis Johnson. He was not in awe of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and those guys. But there was an instance in practice where one time where they were scrimmaging and Michael Jordan was very heated because his team was losing to Robert Parish's team. And there was basically a heated exchange between both Parish and Jordan. And basically, Robert Parish told Michael Jordan, told him, "I'm not as enamored with you. I'm not enamored with you like these other guys. I've got some rings too." And then at that point, Michael walked up to him and literally stood up to him and says, "I'm going to kick your ass." And then Robert Parish, with his tall 7-foot frame, stood up to Jordan and said, no, you really aren't. No, you really aren't." And after that, Michael Jordan did not mess around with Robert Parish afterwards. And let's keep this in mind. Robert Parish during the offseason, learned and trained in mixed martial arts. So Michael, listen, Michael would have had no chance of, hurting Robert Parish under any circumstances. All right. And that's what Jordan did a lot of the time. Jordan would basically bully you and try to test you to see if you were going to take it or if you weren't going to tolerate it. All right. And that's what Bill Cartwright and Robert Parish did. They stood up to Jordan and they weren't going to put up with his BS. See, what all these stories come across to me about Horace Grant is that Horace Grant to me comes across as very mentally weak. Listen, if you have Jordan taking away your food or something like that because you had a bad game, listen, man, you got to stand up for yourself and not put up with the BS, bro. You can't. All right. And Michael Jordan recognized by that time that Horace Grant was more or less mentally weaker than Scottie Pippen. And that's just the facts. All right. And I don't want to hear from these Jordan apologists, saying like, "Oh, he was just doing it to this, making himself and all that." No, there are other ways to do it without basically taking away a man's food or just berating him or wanting to fight with him in practice. There are other ways to do that, and that is not one of them. And I'm glad this documentary is basically detailing a lot of the stuff that I've already knew about Michael Jordan and those kind of practices. Okay, and listen, as good of a player Horace Grant was, I think that Horace Grant was more or less jealous of Michael Jordan to his extent because listen, he maybe more so than Pippen did not appreciate being under the shadow of Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? Because you got to keep this in mind. When Horace Grant was drafted, okay, he came in 6'10", at least 215 as a rookie. By the time the Bulls were at their peak, he was already at 6'10", weighing at least 245, 250 or something like that. You know what I mean? Ferocious rebounder and a good mid-range shooter. But I'm very surprised that he only had one All-Star appearance. You know what I mean? Now I know that the other people are going to say, "Well, it's because of Michael Jordan." When you play with Jordan, you're not going to get it as immense limelight. Well, that's true to a certain extent. But let's keep this in mind. I think if Horace Grant really wanted to take his game to another level, he would at least been maybe a 4 or 5-time All-Star because he already was a really good defender during that time. Okay, but the big difference between Horace Grant and Dennis Rodman is that Dennis Rodman was a much more mentally tougher player than Horace Grant was because Dennis Rodman did more of the hustle, more of the dirty work, and was willing to get into the trenches and willing to scrape with the opposition, something that Horace Grant, was not willing to do. He just wasn't the type of person that could do that. You know what I mean? And the thing with Horace Grant that people need to realize is that a lot of those players really were not fond of playing with Michael Jordan. They just accepted playing with him and learned how to work together with him. But they weren't really close with Jordan at all. They all just tried to, try to keep their distance away from him. But when it was time to play, they had to really work together to try to win, some ball games. And I'm glad that the book, back then really opened up the doors about what was going on in those kind of practices. All right. Because people had the false perception that Jordan was basically a kind-hearted angel that wouldn't hurt nobody. And that's not what really was the truth. And Sam Smith was doing his job as an investigative reporter to try to open up the viewers to see what was really going on in the practices. And that's what you had to do when you're basically an investigative reporter. You know what I mean? And I know that from experience. You know what I mean? Learning journalism when I was in college. Because I used to read some of Sam Smith's stuff, during the breaks in between classes. So at the end of the day, man, Horace Grant knows what he did, and he basically used his friendship with Sam Smith to expose a lot of the stuff that was going on in the practices and in the in management too. You know what I mean? And I'm glad that the documentary is making Horace look bad because it basically proved my point about what Horace Grant was initially was. And in the beginning, I didn't want to believe it, but as I continue to read on, you know, uh, as I continue to read on with the reporting and read on with all the investigative stuff, okay, I recognize by this particular time, Horace Grant did indeed leak out the information. And if you guys don't like it, well, that's tough because the proof is out there, the information is out there. All you got to do is go ahead and read it for yourselves. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Peace.